because I know there's wisdom here.
Yeah,
And
there's always wisdom. There's definitely wisdom
exactly.
that reflects itself when you slow down,
Hmm.
which is the ongoing theme, and then learning how to manage energies appropriately and containing the energy and focusing one thing at a time. And because in Ayurvedic science, Sushruta, which is the father of surgery in Ayurveda, um, he says it's like a lotus bloom that when you put a needle through, even though it might go through all the petals, it still does it one at a time as you're piercing the
Mm.
lotus. And the multitasking is one of the casualties and consequences of our conventional society that's very vitiated.
Hmm.
And if we don't change the momentum of that, then we can't certainly expect not to have neurological issues, increased like ADD and other like focus concentrating issues because it's a nervous system that is on overwhelm, and that will
Yes.
only expedite the degeneration process of health and well-being. So to what degree do we prioritize these things, doing one thing at a time and then slowing down? Because all these, principles that are thousands of years old still apply today, and they were very predictive because they saw that society was going to devolve in this way in many ways.
Hmm.
Increased diseases, increased cancers, increased neurological issues, increased sleep issues, increased immune issues, and it's only picking up momentum. And there was a quote that I found. I was looking at some other quotes, and this one popped up, which is perfect from what we were discussing yesterday, talking about the earth remembers, right?
Yes.
And so the shloka from Charaka Samhita, which is the collection of the first Ayurvedic medical texts ever created and written in. So the oldest, so it's like from the first book or first chapter, so it's at least 9,000 years old, or at least more than five. Some people argue things that are older than five. How possible is that? But anyways, that's a different conversation. So the shloka goes, Sharire Indriya Sattva Masam Yogo Dhari Jivitam Nitya Yagas Chanabandascha Paryayarya Yuruchate. And
Mm.
so, Ayurveda, Ayu is life. Veda is the science of Ayurveda. So Ayurveda is the science of life. Ayu, life implies the conjunction of, the physical body, senses, mind, and soul, and is known by the synonym dhati, that which preserves vitality, jivita, that which is live, nityaga, that which is in continuum, and anubhanda, that which is interdependent or a link between past life and future life. And so we
Mm.
can sort of like expound upon that, you know, the yesterday is carried into today
Hmm.
because, in Ayurvedic science, it's understood that there's karma, past karma, present karma, future karma. And these are things that carry forward into the
Yes.
present moment. And so when we think about Ayurveda and we think about, the body is a historical system and requires consistency for health. That was one of the first um, points that one of my first professors in Ayurveda taught in like 2005 or 2003, something like that. And it's like the body remembers history. And so when a
Hmm.
person comes in, a patient comes in, they're coming in with history. We all have history.
Hmm.
And we have to look at that from the Ayurvedic standpoint in a scrutinous way, that we look at a lot of little different things that Western medicine doesn't really look at.
Hmm.
Um, and some of the things that it does look at, it doesn't really have the same perspective and how to pull it all together with some things in some cases, to make sense of like what is happening today. And, you know, um, And so when we think about the earth, it's a body itself, right? And it has all the elements, just like the physical body. And um, there's a shloka in Ayurveda from Charaka Samhita. It says, Loka Purusha Samya. So it's like as is above, so is below, and
Yes,
or
as above,
you
so
know,
below.
the body and the universe are one, basically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the earth, we look at the mountains, we look at the soil, we look at the rocks, the gemstones, these are holding history. They've been thousands and millions of years, right? When we're doing all this like carbon assessment, carbon printing, right? Carbon analysis, when we're going into the glaciers and seeing how far certain things happen through the lines from like the cylinders that are implanted and pulled out and examined. Like we're looking at, you know, the the effects of like carbon and all these other things. But we also see like a timeline, like a tree
Mm-hmm.
that as
Mm-hmm.
it grows, each year is represented on the when you cut it, you can see the lines and like you can see the different lines and how like it might have been tumultuous one season and the next season had a great growth and the next. So it's like
Oh
so all
yeah,
of
the
nature
knots.
is doing
Mm-hmm.
all this. Yeah. Well then the knots too, if we didn't cut the tree down, but when you cut a tree down, you have like the clean level of it, the clean edge, and you can see all the
Right. You
circles
can see the
and the
circles. Yes.
formations. Yeah. Um, so that tells history, right? From when it was just a little seedling to when it was like a baby tree to when it matured to like 100, 200, 400-year-old tree. And so all of nature, is holding history to the
Mm-hmm.
capacity that everything holds history. And so the body holds history. And so coming in to see, when a patient comes in, uh, it's like, what are they coming in with as far as like, what did they have as an ailment when they were a child? And then, we have a term in Ayurveda called Lina dosha, which means hidden dosha. Lina dosha happens mostly when um, the process of a body rectifying an illness is intervened inappropriately with. So, for instance, everyone that's ever had, anti-febrile or antipyretic or pain management medicines during a fever, when
Mm-hmm.
they've taken Advil, when they've taken Tylenol, any of these things that are managing pain, also manage fever. And so when, a person has had a fever exposure and they take these things to suppress these things, that creates a lina dosha, which is a manifestation of the dosha on a deep hidden levels of the physiology. And it manifests itself in various ways. So when a person comes in and they're like, yeah, sometimes I feel better in certain seasons, but then I feel worse in the next seasons. And then in certain times of day, it doesn't feel so good, but other times of day, it feels good. When I do something to try to remedy it a little bit, it kind of helps. But when I stop, it doesn't help. And so these are signs that there's Lina dosha present and it has to be extracted properly so that the integrity of the tissues are reinstated so that the immunity. And we also fight against time. So if a person had like scarlet fever, because some people still get scarlet fever, not as much
Mm-hmm.
today, but
Mm-hmm.
and that wasn't remedied properly, and that started in childhood, that creates a momentum. So if a person comes in finally at like 65 or 70, they already started life with this deficit. And then
Yes.
it's, accumulating on a cellular level. And then in Western medicine, we increase medications per year as we get older, as more medications. Ayurveda tries to reduce the medications and sustain Ayurvedically as much as possible, but the the further along someone is with time, then this time is what holds against the person.
So
Because
can
even
we
in
pause for a
Ayurveda,
second? Can we pause for
yeah,
a
yeah,
second? Right,
yeah,
because
yeah,
there's so much here, right?
yeah.
Um, and I think what, there were a few things that are very loud for me right now and in my life and in the world. Um, and maybe I'll work backwards because I think as you were describing the cumulative impact of suppression of the deeper root um,
Mhm.
imbalance, right? That or illness that exists in the body that is suppressed.
Mhm.
Um, it really makes me think also about the wounds, right? Even the psychological wounds, the
Mhm.
trauma, the experiences that we have that we are either told don't matter, aren't actually happening, or where we might even internally say, I'm going to suppress, right?
Mhm.
Unconsciously suppress this experience. And so I can think about, many ways in which as a child, I have or I did suppress experiences in my family where my needs weren't met, right? And then
Mhm.
as an adult over time, that becomes a pattern of me expecting that my needs will not be met. And so jumping in and trying to control and fix and do,
Mhm.
and this becomes a pattern beyond my family and my social conditioning as a woman, as a girl, as a person socialized in a body that presents as female, to do, to fix, to care. So I get rewarded for that
Mhm.
socially. But there's a wounding there that also over time is not acknowledged. And
Mhm.
so that shows up. And at, my big age of 42, I am aware that those patterns are also manifesting as imbalance in my body.
Mhm.
Right? You know this, I know this, right? And so I am really curious about like the psychological and somatic connection that Ayurveda sees, or um, how we would even think about that, right? For the all of the different kinds of wounding that is repressed, suppressed, pushed into the
Mhm.
shadow. Um, and we'll get to the next lifetimes because I'm definitely considering like 12th house stuff in astrology, right? Like the stuff that will be our undoing if not worked with in this lifetime. It will find us again. Um,
Mhm.
so I'll just pause and see what's coming up for you. There were many other threads I want to come back to.
Yeah, yeah, no, of course. Yeah, and a lot of it comes down to digestion and the capacity to metabolize experiences. And an experience that we metabolize would be eating, a bowl of, you know, or a plate of food. But life gives us a plate as well as experience that we have to metabolize. And so it's about the mental capacity, which in many cases, in pretty much all cases, is an inherited component of our existence that was shaped from previous karmas based on Ayurveda, and then knowing, the whole life that is individualized has um, manufactured this processing capacity or incapacity, right? Because that's inherited to some degree. It's like, what is the state of the parents when they're conceiving? You know, very often when I have patients that want to consider pregnancy, I'm like, what level of quality of pregnancy does someone want to imbue? Because Ayurveda has very high standards, trying to
Mhm.
rectify all the potential things to reduce the chances of any cataclysmic consequences of inappropriate actions around even just preparing for pregnancy. And it's not as easy as just like I'm trusting in divine grace. Yeah, that's fine. But you wouldn't necessarily try to walk in traffic with your eyes closed and trust in divine grace. You would just try not to walk in traffic. And most people, as we're evolving, don't make proper choices. And how can we when we're so inundated and overwhelmed and all these things? And it's like when we have to create pregnancy properly, Ayurveda say clean the soil, fertilize the soil, ensure that there are no things growing inappropriately there, so that we can ensure the safety and preservation of the child's well-being, mental, physical, and emotional. And these are steps that are just so skipped because most people don't have time, no people don't have the money, no people have the energy, it should be easy. No, it's like some things you should take time, and most people don't have time. You know, there's a term in Ayurveda called ati, which is like the busyness or multitasking. It's a thing that consumes people and causes degeneration. This busyness creates great problems. People are always on the
Hmm.
go, people are always going, people are missing things, people are just overwhelmed so easily. Like we're a very overwhelmed society.
Hmm.
People are just very overwhelmed very easily. And it's such a sensitive, we call it sukumar, which means like sort of weak in constitution, very fragile. And this fragility is not meant to be, when things are properly cultivated, to be, because we can be very hardy and strong and disciplined, and mind is solid, digesting experiences. So if we're able to get to a place where the mind is digesting experiences properly, then we will hold less in our physiology.
So
The
this
body
is
will be
this. Yeah, no, go ahead.
the body will be holding less hostage
That
and
part.
be held less in hostage. Right. So the mind keeps the body in hostage. And
Mm-hmm.
then when the body starts to break down, we wonder why.
Mm-hmm.
But it's because it's an unruly mind, you
It's an
know.
unruly mind. It's and I can speak as a squirrely, squiggly mind, right? The there are also these conditions, right? So there's like what is choice free will, right? Absolutely exists. To choose to be busy is definitely an option, right? Is definitely a path as someone who has chosen to be busy, right? To distract from
Mhm.
the stuff of circumstance of my context, right? My experience.
Mhm.
And also, there are elements of our society, right? Very much born from, I think, the like extraction of capitalism, right? The not enoughness, the need to do more, there is always something else. So I really
Mhm.
appreciate, right, the idea that um, multitasking does not work for me. I absolutely agree. And also, society would try to reward me for multitasking. Oh, look, you can have your phone right here on this holder so that you can do four other things while using your phone. You can parent, you can talk, you can type, you can cook, you could do all these things at one time. And
Mhm.
there is not enough time. This is
Yeah.
a falsity, right? That not enough
Yeah.
time, right? That um, we internalize that for survival, right, in this society, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so as I'm hearing you, right, I feel like there's an evolutionary call right now,
Hmm.
um, as we are bumping up against the edges of capitalism holding on, at least this stage or late stage, this evolution of capitalism holding on. Um, and uh, the fractures in the belief system that has upheld capitalism, where folks are like, this no longer serves me. I don't know how to get out, but I know this is not working.
Yeah.
There's a friction here, right? So I feel that in my body when I believe, right? When I meditate, when I do slow down, when I am connected to my body, to source, when I'm able to align with what's here in the present moment, I can remember that there is more time available to slow down. But that
But also,
requires an incredible practice. Yeah, go ahead.
but also with the practice of meditation, when we're doing it properly, we're able to make different choices in our day to day and knowing more clearly what to engage in and what not to engage in. And again, like I said earlier, with Shushruta talking about, the blossoming lotus that you puncture with the needle one petal at a time, even if you do it fast, it still has to go through one at a time. So if I'm texting while I'm on the phone and I'm cooking and talking to someone and running around the kitchen, I'm just doing one thing at a time very fast. But
Mhm.
that's the concern because you're still doing it one thing at a time, just very fast. And that's what causes a lot of exhaustion. There's a fun quote that I saw on the Banksy exhibit, and when I was recently in London. He says, "We can't do anything to change the world until capitalism crumbles. In the meantime, we should all go shopping to console ourselves."
Yes.
I appreciate his wit and his, because he's very layered in like his messages, and that's why he's very provocative to society, which is great. I love him. And thinking about like, we're watching society just degrading in so many ways. We could flip and because I don't want to make it sound like, oh, Dr. A is so pessimistic. We have to look at the picture as a whole. And there's another shloka quote in Charaka. It's one of my first quotes that I've really loved and memorized. And it says, Hita hitam sukham dukham ayustasya hita hitam. Manam cha tacha yaktrokitam ayurvedaha sauchate. So this says, and this is also like in the very first chapter, like he has, I mean, Charaka just drops bombs everywhere. And you can spend months, not years, like unpacking just a single sentence because this was the level of intelligence that existed at a certain point in time that is like is the encaptured inherent universal wisdom that is indisputable. If
Mm,
it is being disputed, it's usually because a person lacks a proper comprehension. Because if there's proper comprehension, there is no dispute. This is completely something that is accepted. Some things, of course, in concept, you don't accept, and that's where debate comes in, and that's great because transformation happens from debate, proper debate. But there are some pieces of wisdom that are just like, ah. And so what this quote says is that Ayurveda is the science that can understand, you know, um, and deals with what is good and what is not good, what
mhm,
is, causing contentment and what causes discontent, what is wholesome and what is unwholesome for longevity and life and well-being itself. So Ayurveda is the only science in the world that knows so intricately the connections of all these things that are good, not good, wholesome, unwholesome, content and discontent. And it's like, oh, it's very easy to think it's a basic statement, but when you really look at it and meditate on it, it's like Ayurveda can break it all down completely. And he even goes on to say, he's like, of all the Vedic sciences, Vedic scholars regard Ayurveda as the most exalted of all the Vedas, even more than Jyotish, because Jyotish, which is astrology, which is one of the oldest systems of astrology in the world, um,
mhm,
is, we'll say, and I remember speaking to a very renowned astrologer who passed. She said, yeah, 80% of the astrology is correct. It will never be more than that because there is 20% of free will. And she
mhm,
said, her name was Betalanya Radha. She said, it should only be limited at 80% because to have that much power and capacity in one human is inappropriate because Shiva, who some believe like was where astrology came from, but we could say God, divine, whatever, all that.
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
it's called Shiva's curse, she said. And she said that only 80% of the astrology can be correct. And in Ayurveda, if Charaka says, of all the Vedic sciences, Ayurveda is the ultimate of the sciences. And it can pull from like yoga and Jyotish and things like that, Tantra. Um, but Ayurveda is like the overseeing, integrative, scientific agent that
mhm,
deciphers properly what is appropriate at any given point in time. That's why, some cases when I see a patient, I might refer them to an astrologer because there's certain things happening. Or I can pull up their astrology very quickly from the medical standpoint of Ayurveda and I can see certain patterns and say, you need to get certain rituals done because this is a very deeply rooted karmic thing that
mhm,
herbs for sure will support, but not enough to shift that frequency because that frequency was something that was inherited from past karma, past karmas, whether in this life or previous life. These are all things that can be helped through and seen partly through the astrology. But Ayurveda is the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the ears, the touch of all that pulling it all together. And it's very profound because the science is such a a living entity. I mean, it's survived the test of time and over the thousands of years in India. As many other countries invaded India to try to abolish Ayurveda, killing Ayurvedic physicians, burying the materials, burning the materials, all these things. What has survived through thousands of years is still amazing. And it's the
Yes.
science of life. It will never die. And it is the science of life. And so understanding this makes us see like where are we arriving at today? Because we look back in history and we read some of these things and we can see as historians reading some of these contexts what life was like then. But in Charaka, Vimanasthana, which is a different chapter, Vimanasthana 8, he talks about pandemics. So this is over 7,000 years ago. He talks about in this chapter, we will discuss all the elements that are required to create a pandemic. And he goes through all the different elements of contamination. And actually, when I wrote my series on the 5 elements or the five, contaminations of the different elements, like I've referenced this chapter. So thousands of years ago, he already saw what was happening.
Mhm.
You know, like COVID's just one of many examples of pandemics that we've had. And it's not the last one. We have many
No.
more. As long as we're human and we have corrupt governments and societies and we have corrupt lifestyles that we're staying up late, missing meals, eating on the go, and eating inappropriate foods and pushing through this and pushing through that and forgetting about each other and then the increase of all the technology and all the currents and electromagnetic currents and all these things are just speeding up the process.
Well, it's
This is
interesting,
science.
this is science, right? Like this is science. This is science. Um, and this is and from a non-dual perspective, right? Like this is science, this is spirit, right? This is very much, I think, when I connect with astrology through my body, when I connect with astrology through my intuition as a sacred language and also as a divination tool, right? Even as you were describing, what the body knows and the medicine that is prescribed, the medicine that when we work together, I know that my rituals to honor my ancestors are a part of
Mhm,
my medicine. And if you look in at my natal chart, um, uh, it is very clear in the fourth house, and so this is in tropical astrology, right? In the tropical lens. So I'm curious about Jyotish, and I actually am very interested in studying Jyotish in Indian derived astrology as well. And so right now, when I look at the fourth house in my tropical natal chart, I have some pretty powerful placements there. I have Pluto in Libra in the fourth house. I have Jupiter in Libra and Saturn in Libra in the fourth house. So in my house of ancestry, in my house of roots, my root system, my family, my childhood family, my caregivers, the places where I have the in Libra, right, my foundational relationships. Um, there has been major transformation, right? Pluto representing death and transformation, death and rebirth, a full life cycle. Um, and with Jupiter representing the wisdom that is available when, right? It's karmic wisdom. It's a wisdom that's available um, when you are able to be with experience and learn the lessons. Then there is an abundance of wisdom available. That's how I view Jupiter, right? And then Saturn, which is very much right, Chronos representing um, time, representing chronological time, representing linear time, representing the time across lifetimes, also karmic
mhm,
time, lessons, boundaries, um, limits that I must break, chains that I must break in order to
mhm,
progress evolutionary. So when I think about that and the wounding that showing up or the imbalance that's showing up in this body that I know is older than this body, that I know has an opportunity to heal. I also make a larger connection to um, the way that Pluto is acting right now for the collective as
Hmm.
a transformational um, invitation for purification with these empires. So even as you talked about, right, the empires that stole and burned and tried to destroy and eliminate and invalidate Ayurveda, British Empire. I name the names.
Hmm.
So, right, America is right now in its Pluto return, the
Hmm.
Empire of the United States. And so when I connect with, right, the upheaval, right, the what feels like such an incredibly high stress
Hmm.
level on our bodies, on all of us collectively. Yeah, I'm eating in the car. I'm on the go. I'm like, I'm doing too much. I'm distracted. There's too much. I'm trying not to watch the news because you don't know
Hmm.
what you can believe. But then
Hmm.
I'm like, okay, but I need to get information from a source over here. So I'm on my phone more, trying to find news sources that I can trust.
Hmm.
I am moving more because I feel more stress in my body. And so I want to release it. I want to push it out. I want to work it out. But I'm mindful that my mind is racing even in my sleep. And so my body is remembering something greater than just this moment right now. So I just want to connect back with you on that too, because I feel like this is something that we're experiencing in the collective
Hmm.
um, body memory.
Yeah, definitely. And, we can't really escape the past, right? It's how we interpret it, process it, and how it manifests today. But we have to know today, is relevant to yesterday. And we look at what's happening today. Are we in a good state or are we in not a good state? And, it's the ambiguity of the fragmented mind that creates the lack of clarity from making a proper choice right now, with all these distractions and all these things that are just noise. So how do we simplify that? And, you know, um, there are various levels of intelligence and various levels of quality of mind. And so, that's all karmically determined too. Ayurveda breaks down, these there are gunas, manasa gunas, which are like the mind qualities of sattva, rajas, and tamas. And that's a very elaborate process to discuss, like sattva, rajas, and tamas. But rajas basically is sort of like the fragmentation, um, and mobilization and sort of like scatteredness and just ongoing energy that's intense. That's like always just kind of like looking and like not clear. Sort of like the analogy would be like a rajasic mind is where like you have a lake and it's an evening and there's a moon and you see the moon reflection in the water, but um you shake up the water and then you have that fragmentation where you still see components of the moon, but you can't see it clearly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like you think you're making a clear choice, but are you really making a clear choice? Because if you're in that rajasic place, are you making a clear choice? And Manasa doshas in Ayurveda, that implies in Ayurveda that there are two components of the mind, Rajas and Tamas, that would create the illness of the mind. Because if Rajas is that fragmentation, Tamas is where you have the lake and the moon's reflection, but then you take a big stick and you stir the water, and now it's just murky water. So you don't see the translucency of the moon. You see the essence of like this moon light you, but it's not clear. That's more the inert. That's the inertia. That's the tamas. That's the lack of clarity. It's the dullness of perception. So going between dullness of perception to over fragmentation, over stimulation, over just hyperactivity, then you can't from those two places. Sattva is where the mind is just completely in a still place. There is no activity. It's just completely present. The moon's reflection in the water is completely clear. And you don't know the difference between looking at the sky and looking at the water. And
Mm-hmm.
this is what meditation strives. And there are certain herbs, there's a category of herbs called madhya, um, that the herbs are this powerful that they go to the mind to that
Mm,
level and really change the quality of the mind and also support removing any negative karmas, any negative energies, entities, things like that, and possessions. Like there's a very small category of herbs that does this. Um, so how amazing to know that the plant kingdom wants to support this and can, and that
of
this level
course.
of that Ayurveda, this level of intelligence that Ayurveda possesses to know the world, like what is good, what is not good, what is content, what is not content, what is unwholesome and what is wholesome. Ayurveda can look at every single thing, right? And we were talking yesterday, um, that you know we're so busy, we go on to the next day and the next day and the next day, and time progresses and things like that, and we forget things, right? So we forget how history plays a role in how we are today. So um, when we had this fire last year from Canada, right?
Hmm.
And that was one of many fires. We had the major fires in Italy that same, later summer, and then just the little fires in California. Like, collectively, when there are all these fires happening on the same planet, which is huge and small in the bigger picture, it's going to have a cumulative effect because the aftermath of the residue of the changes in atmospheric pressure and atmospheric carbons that also land in the soil, that land in the water, that land in just in the particulates of the air and sediment and so, and then like the plants that are growing in that soil and that water from that water today are going to have the
Hmm.
essence of that. And it's been going on
Hmm.
for since time immemorial because this is how things are being remembered. Like things are just going somewhere and storing. And so and I predicted, this year people are going to have more respiratory stuff and other things and increased anxiety. And as a historian of Ayurveda, knowing these things, I knew that when these fires were happening last year, especially the way they affected us, how like there's going to be this unfolding, and it's
Hmm.
connected to that.
Can I pause you for a second? Because I think
Mm,
this is so powerful. When we talked about this, and we talked about it when it was happening, and I was getting sick.
mhm,
I had, right, respiratory congestion, my left ear
mhm,
closed, right? And then I started talking to other family members also here in the Northeast who three of them seniors above, age 70, who all had ear infections. And
mhm,
how often do you talk to seniors, right, who have ear infections? I found that to be kind of anomalous. And they were family
mhm,
members that don't live near each other, but live, right, like in New York, in Philadelphia, in the North, but not together. And
mhm,
then would talk to many other people who were experiencing, various upper respiratory congestion. And I remember saying, I think it's because of these fires. And I think that smoke was so intense. And I remember we talked about it. And then I think I talked about it with a physician, a physician's assistant who, loved them. And they were like, well, I don't really know that we can show a direct connection because, right, because there's no data, which we continue to hear until there's data, right?
yeah,
There was no data on long COVID till there was data, but we were here saying, hey, there's something going on neurologically. We're seeing patterns. And so the piece that I want to bring, I'm always going to bring up the political, like the gaslight, whether we gaslight ourselves or whether other institutions are telling us what we're experiencing is not real. And I
yeah,
think there's something very particular about when we are experiencing, as I love how you're how we're talking about the earth remembers, right? When I think of remembrance, especially from a healing perspective, I think about the reclamation of our wholeness, the
yeah,
reconnection to source. The earth is doing as well. And while it may look like crisis, feel like crisis, it is real. There's earth is bringing into balance what we have created as imbalance. And so I think there's something really important here about trusting the body in this relationship with the earth, right? Where we are told by all kinds of institutions what you're seeing and experiencing is not connected. And
Yeah,
that's happening. So I just want to.
but it's hard because you have, you know, the food that's contaminated from GMOs and pesticides and stuff. So this is already altering physiological tissue, preventing the clarity of things. So you can't make a clear decision in that. So you have to know that that's already a root cause. Drinking water from tap is another example of contamination that's exposed to us, many people every day. Not my patients because everyone has a filter, but people don't think, when I talk to people and they're like, oh, I just drink tap water, it's fine. I'm like, that already tells me that they're either tamasic or rajasic, that they don't have the
Mm,
proper intelligence from really grounded, inherently designed place. Because if so, it would be indisputable and make sense. It's like when the fire was happening, people were outside still running. And
I was in the
especially those
car
first
with a
3, 4
mask on
days,
and I couldn't
especially
breathe.
those first 3, 4 days where like, state of emergency was like stay indoors and people were still running. And mask or no mask, it does not matter. And I'm like, where's the intelligence of this person? It's not there. Why is it not there? Is it because their cells are not clear? Is it because they're not meditating? Is it because they're just overwhelmed with busyness, the distorted? Why is there a distortion? Because it was a no-brainer to me and
Mhm.
to many people that I know that stay indoors. Very simple.
The
Not like, oh,
sky
I
was
still have to go outside
orange.
and go running. Because right now we're in a state of emergency and you want to go running. I
But
would
I
like to
think
have
that
those.
speaks to something else that you said about the heightened anxiety. And so someone who has run for many years to I think sate or to address anxiety, right? Like running as an act of movement to move the stress and anxiety
Yeah.
in my body. I think there are definitely experiences people have where there's like a need that seems like it is impossible to move away, even as you cannot actually breathe, right? So to your point, it doesn't align. Would that be Rajic or Tamasic from the
Both.
mental standpoint? Okay,
Both.
right.
Yeah, in essence, it's both. It's a
Right.
lack of
And
clarity
so
and
there's so many people that are like addicted to their routines that seem healthy, right? But not in alignment with what would make
present
sense.
state reality.
Yeah.
Because most people are not in present state reality, are always avoiding something. And then, you know, watching the news all the time. It's another type of like trying to be aware of the world, but also disassociation from the present world that you're in. Like, of course,
Mhm.
you should know like things that are happening in the political climate globally, of course. And then to what degree do you stay affixed that it asphyxiates, right? When people are
Yeah.
waking up, putting CNN, falling asleep with CNN. No, this is not appropriate for the mind. This is like really poison for the mind
Hmm.
first thing in the morning and before bed. The impressions that these things are leaving on the subconscious, on the nervous system, the body needs to be protected. The mind needs to be preserved, you
Hmm.
know. Um, asat Mindriyata Samyoga. It's another term in Ayurveda. It's one of several causes of disease, which is misuse of the senses. What are we looking at? What are we listening to? What are we smelling? What are we tasting? What are we touching? That is appropriate or inappropriate. Asat Mindriyartha Samyoga is one of the causes of disease. Parinam is another one because parinam means time. Time means kala, and that's a linear fashion. Time means the progression of the seasons, progression of the seasons of life. Like this
Hmm.
is linear. This is the natural state of disease, of course. You know, and pranya parhada, misuse of intelligence, is one of the first causes of disease. So these three are the main three causes of disease. Um, Pranyaparada, Mendriyata Samyoga, and Parinam. So if you're misusing the senses, looking at things inappropriately in excess, or listening to things that are not good, and yelling and screaming and fighting, and you're eating foods that are just contaminated, and then you're, you know, making inappropriate choices, and oh, I'm sick, I have a cold, but I want pizza anyway, so I'll still eat the pizza, which will not taste the same. And so I don't want the soup because that's boring. It's improper intelligence because the body does not inherently want pizza when you're sick. It's like, give me less.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the mind that is corrupt,
Mm-hmm.
that people are like, well, I'm just going to do whatever I want anyway. Yeah, good. Because then when you do that, and then in 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 40 years from now, time, kala, will catch up to people. And then when it comes with a vengeance, in Ayurveda, no one just falls into disease overnight. It is a slow
Somehow,
progression over time.
yes, yes.
And when someone makes it to 70 and they're like, oh, it was great all this time. Yes, because the Constitution was capable of like holding it at bay, and now at 70 it will not. But now you lost a lot of resources to manage some of these things from 30 years before that could have been rectified, so that at 70 it would not have exploded into this kind of like bomb. And then at that point you have less to work with. You know, in Ayurveda, Panchakarma is indicated for people from age 12 to 60. Um, After 60, then most of the karmas, the 5 actions of purification, detoxification, expulsion of the doshas, are contraindicated because of age. So even if there's, you know, and there's only 2 treatments, basti karma and marshana nasya or nasya, that are indicated still around like up to 80, um, because of the effects and how you can rectify them without it having aggressiveness. Um, and then at that point, you can't use those either, right? So it's like there are certain things that will work. So if time's in your favor, you can maximize a lot of things with these advanced protocols in Ayurveda. But then at a certain point, you run out of time, and then
Mm-hmm.
all you can do is just do your best, right?
So
And
this is, go ahead, go ahead, I'm sorry.
yeah, and so you can try to do your best and hopefully not get, major things happen, but things don't just come out of nowhere.
Right.
Right? Nothing doesn't come out of nothing. There has to be something for something to represent itself. And then it's just a matter of time. So it's almost like a ticking time bomb. And, if karma's in your favor and you've had good genetics and, general good hearty, you know, um, parental foundations, which if you have a parent that is, from the 30s to the 60s, or up until the 60s, like that historical content of hardiness that created a certain level of strength, right? Because we had like dire concerns in the 1800s with different flus, different influenzas, different like black plagues and stuff like that. You know, indoor plumbing and heating was not the same, but people were built hardier, right? And then around the 60s, canned foods, boxed food, preserved foods started getting introduced into the market.
Mm-hmm.
People weren't accessing whole foods anymore. And now we're having preservatives, right? And plastics are putting into foods. And like there was just an article I read a couple weeks ago about, I think one of the Quaker oats or something like that, they found like a relationship to it and plastics and physiology. And it was just like, yeah, even oats were supposed to be healthy are not
Yes.
proper. And so it's like, where are you getting your food sources? Where is your water? Oh, bottles of water, the Avion water and the Deer Park,
Water
which is
was
all,
free. Remember when water was free?
yeah. And you drink out of a hose. But, because there's like memes on Facebook that make jokes about, if you survive getting spun off on one of those like seesaws in playground, you would drink from a hose, you know, you didn't die. You survived. But there's a joke in that, but there's also a truth in that because things
Mhm.
weren't as contaminated as they are today. So you do
This is
not
true.
drink from tap water or, or hose water or any things or hydrant water because growing up, the hydrant was on in the summertime. You go outside and you just drink it because it's really cold. It was amazing.
Hmm.
But now you don't do that, right? And so it's like, where's the intelligence and making the better choices? And everyone wants to argue and justify negative behaviors. And then, of course, then you have the pseudoscientists that are like, well, I want to see the scientific data in that. Yeah, sometimes Western science doesn't catch up to Eastern science. And Eastern
Mm,
science sometimes has a certain common sense that still lacks, which is why like Western looks very often to the East to see what they can extrapolate, and dilute and or
that
adapt.
part. that part. Those four words actually is a process, right? Extract, extrapolate, dilute. And what was the last one?
Um,
It was
manipulate.
spot on. Manipulate is definitely, I mean, there's probably like we could get in it, but
Yeah.
there's something about what
No.
happens, right? The dilution is really important.
Yeah.
The
Because it tries
dilution
to
is
fit
really
in.
important,
And that's why
right?
there's this conflict from Eastern medicine to Western medicine, because Eastern medicine is much older than Western medicine. And
Hmm.
I think everyone can get along. And I think the West definitely has more to learn from the East. And Ayurveda, being the oldest of the holistic medical sciences, is, we know it in the community as an inductive, um, deductive system where the information is already there.
Hmm.
It's just a matter of unpacking it and applying the
Hmm.
principles properly. It's all understood. HIV could be understood from the Ayurvedic perspective from thousands of years ago. There's a chapter called Jvara, which is one of the main Maharogas, which is like the main disease. And it's understood amongst clinicians that if you can understand thoroughly and memorize all the major chapters of Jvara or fever, you can understand every single disease in the future and present, all diseases.
Mm.
So it's like, how
Hmm.
profound is this wisdom that the knowledge is already there, you have to just know how to think about it. And so that's why it's a deductive system. The inductive system is the Western model where you're trying to build up these bodies of knowledge through trial and error, through painful processes. And, it's very interesting because Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine, they never did experiments on animals. They already
Hmm.
knew inherently how to like dissect the body and not, you know, create guinea pigs of people and or um animals, right?
Animals.
So it was already protective. But Western medicine, we have to do testing on mice and rats and chimpanzees and monkeys, and like we're using the animal kingdom. And this is another example of how we're not living in alignment with nature, right?
Correct.
I'm watching this show called Vikings as a recently added
Hmm.
on Netflix. And very often when they're doing like a new endeavor or a new beginning or a new blessing, depending on the intention of what the blessing that they want to achieve and how wide the net should be with the blessings they want to obtain, there are sacrifices. This is known for all cultures, African
Hmm.
tribes, Native
Hmm.
American tribes, Peruvian tribes, India, Chinese, that when you did a sacrifice, it actually allowed you to stay in alignment with the natural laws.
Hmm.
And we've deviated very much from offering to the divine, offering to nature, right? And blood is one of the most powerful components to offer to nature. That's why, like, they might have just killed like a chicken or a goat or something like that. And when they really wanted like a really profound blessing, they would use a human sacrifice, but the human will be the one that decided who wanted to be offered up to the divine because they knew it was a positive intention here. And in Ayurveda, you know, sacrificing, creating like bloodshed or bloodletting, like is an offering. It's a
Hmm.
purification process, right? In the 17, 1800s, when there was illness, they would use leeches, they would use like
Hmm.
cuts, they would cut the body, they would try to like siphon out blood that was impure blood, right?
Hmm.
And then to purify and then offer, but then we just continue progressing in society where we're doing inappropriate offerings, where like we're killing people for the sake of ego.
That part. And I think there's something very important here. I have a dear friend, Charlotte James, a brilliant teacher with many forms of indigenous plant medicine, um, and she talks about the stages, and similar to what I was, as you were talking about the extraction, extrapolation, and dilution, Charlotte talks about the stages of the colonization um, of ancient medicines, and specifically the stage of demonization, right? Before you get
Mhm.
to co-opting, right? The demonization. So the demonization, as you're, and especially as we were talking about, right, like the sacrificial process of connecting with earth and spirit, right? That connection was demonized by Western cultures, um, by empire, right? By empire tied to capitalism, right? This idea that if we cannot extract wealth and resources from this process, it is evil until we
Mhm.
figure out another way, which is how, then you do get animal lab testing on animals,
Mhm.
right? Completely devoid of a connection with the divine. This is where you do get this sacrifice of human life on a daily basis, or the explicit um, uh, uh, killing of humans
Yeah.
without remorse. So I think that there's something really important about what you're talking about in these processes of extraction and getting back to, right, reclaiming the original medicines. I do think that that is um, an invitation that we are experiencing on the collective right now, even as we're learning new ways of regenerative farming, and we're making that accessible to communities that have been systemically disconnected from farming, like Black communities in cities, right? When we're looking at the ability, right? Because when we're talking about who can afford whole foods, who can
Mhm.
afford fresh foods, who has
Mhm.
access to, if you live in a food desert and you don't have access to that, how can we reclaim um, what has always been here? And I think there's a collective movement in that direction. And that's the call that we're experiencing right now. I think this is happening as more and more people are recognizing um, the wisdom of Ayurveda and many other ancient and indigenous practices that are earth honoring, that are systemically connected, right? See the whole connection between the body, earth, and spirit,
Mhm.
that this is expanding in the collective consciousness as we are seeing, especially coming out of the pandemic,
Mhm.
coming out of COVID, where many of us recognize that we were human sacrifices to capitalist and corporate interests. So I
Mhm.
feel like I'm not saying to be sensational. That is what I feel like is a coming into the collective consciousness and awareness.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, and again,
I know I
coming
just
back
said a
to
lot.
no, and coming back to the simplicity of it is if people are distorted and disoriented in their thinking capacity, they won't see clearly. They won't
Yeah.
choose clearly, right? And
Mhm.
there's a lot of things inherently fundamental that most people aren't aware of that is making things connected. So even if you're not able to get to a point of clarity, um, it's like you don't know it because you're not seeing clearly. But when you start to see clearly, you can't unsee anymore. It's like when you start to
Mhm.
see, you can't unsee, right? With all the killings and stuff like that, random people just robbing and shooting. It's like these are not proper sacrifices, right? So a person is just so caught up in their own mental fragmentation and suffering and pain that they can't see outside of that. And so they're entrapped within the torturing thoughts of their own processes. That means that they're not metabolizing the experience of whatever might be fundamentally happening. You know, I had the pleasure of meeting Arun Gandhi, which was the great grandson of Mahatma Gandhi many years ago. He gave a talk and he said, as he continued his grandfather's tradition of ahimsa, he would reiterate that Mahatma Gandhi would say, when primary needs are not met, this becomes what is that passive, then develops into aggressive acts of violence.
Mhm.
And the primary needs are, food, shelter, medical, um, educational, all the main categories that support instilling in a person proper well-being and development.
Mhm.
If any one of
Mhm.
these things are faltering, then it becomes from passive to aggressive acts of violence.
Mhm.
And so on a fundamental societal level, there are many deficits, right? And then you add in the confusion of the poor quality foods, right? It's like they don't teach home economics anymore. They don't teach you how to like really do bills and write your bills and know how to go shopping and how to cook and all these things, you know. Because if they did, it could add in, when you go to like the Acme, you should most likely, if you're going to try to figure out economics with proper eating, then you don't buy anything in the center aisles. You
Mm-hmm.
just buy from the parameter of the store. And if you see the layout of the stores, it's like the produce, the dairy, the meats. Um, that's a safer bet. Safer, not the safest, because you still have to think, as the meat treated with hormones, and you're seeing more packaging of less hormones and less, which is great. And then, how reputable is that? You have to do the research, but people don't want to do all that, because there's a level of complacency, right? No one learns how to like get some planters in the balcony and put some like tomato seeds and basil seeds and just try to cultivate that, right? And like minimize how much harm you're putting into the body. People don't have time because that's actually the cheapest way. You want to eat
Mm-hmm.
tomatoes cheaper, that good, grow them, but
You
people don't
know,
know.
there's two things that are coming up for me, maybe for us to consider for our closeout today. One, and just what you shared, right? I was connecting with this idea that actually it's a dear colleague and coach, Dr. Kaylin Johnson, and I work together, and she's brilliant. One of the things that she works with folks who are neurospicy, who identify as neurodivergent minds, and bioexpansive mind bodies. I think that's another way to think about our mind body connection. And um, the the thing that I think she talks about with me quite frequently is related, right? When you're talking about our basic needs, right? Are our basic needs met? Those needs of of foundational security. You can look at like the old Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? But at that base level, and there's different ways to look at that because there's issues
Hmm.
sometimes with, Maslow's doesn't apply to all of us. But
Hmm.
the basic needs of food, safety, security,
Hmm.
home, shelter,
Hmm.
um, for so many bodies, those needs are not met.
Hmm.
And yet we still survive. And so those needs aren't met. And then you get to the next layer, right, of emotional
Hmm.
security, right? Right, relationships that are healthy and connected, that we feel a sense of emotional grounding, rooting,
Hmm.
wholeness, worthiness. These needs can go unmet, and we can jump straight to self-actualization. I
Hmm.
could have a master's degree. And even if I don't have a master's degree, I could have three jobs and put food on the table. Now, we don't talk about what kind of food, but I put food on the table to get my children fed and to school. And
Hmm.
so, right, there's an element of self-actualization there. There's an element of survival beyond my
Hmm.
circumstances.
Hmm.
And so when we look at that happening consistently over time, there's an imbalance that I think is
Hmm.
um, it needs attention.
Hmm.
And I am mindful that as someone who has learned to um how to survive
Hmm.
um without those needs being met, even when I now have the resources to get them, I will override them to get to achievement. I
Hmm.
will override them to get to a sense of uh public external perceived success.
Hmm.
And so I'm sitting here with that, and I'm really thinking about um when you talk about the aggression, because I can see right in the way that um you can relate to the world from that place, right?
Hmm.
There's not only can you be passive or move from passive to aggressive violence externally, but it also happens internally. there's a
Hmm.
deep level of self-judgment that exists in that relationship and that dynamic. And I'm curious how Ayurveda, sees that, or how, like, as you're hearing that, what's coming up for you.
Yeah, I mean, again, it comes down to like everyone's trying to do the best they can from where they're at in this moment in time, right? And it's like if you don't have access to certain knowledge, and you think that all you know is what you know, and that's all you could do with the knowledge is what you know you have right now, right? And so it's like, how do we bridge the gap from like what can you know? Like where do you get access to the information of how to know? And so this is where technology could work in our favor or against us because we can have access to these kind of podcasts to really encourage that level of intelligence so people can start having their wheels turn more, you know, because the
Mhm.
questioning is a valid thing that we've been doing since humans have started existing, is the questioning, right? Um, but in current society, we're not mostly taught how to think anymore, and things are
Mm.
numbed out, anesthetized, or drugged.
That's
And
a
it
part of the
comes not even,
dilution process.
yeah,
Hmm.
and it's not just drugged through medications, it's drugged through like the quality of food that has medications in it, that has antibiotics in it and has like all these things in it. And of course, it's very interesting to see the contrast in like quality of food and quality of life in Europe versus US.
Hmm.
When I was shopping there and looking at certain foods, the number of ingredients and some of the packaging was so less, so extremely less compared to all the packaging in the US and all these ingredients and natural flavors. You don't even find natural flavors listed as an ingredient anywhere. You don't. It's not a thing. It
What
is.
is
It's like
it?
it's actually considered illegal in Europe. Like
Mhm.
they crack down on a lot of things, but yet the US allows this, right? And it's like the distortion of the pharmaceutical slash FDA influence, right? Like, because that's where these things have to get approved, right? So the labels have to get approved by
Mhm.
these different bodies, and pharmaceuticals might have their, hand in some pockets that everyone kind of has a thought that is a thing, right? And so it's understanding, well, how do you expect to make proper choices if what you're eating every day has drugs in it, right? So then you have to start thinking, how do I step outside of this box? And it's not always easy. So that's why, a mom of 6 kids, like when I used to be a social worker, and moms would take their kids up the street to the local Chinese food store, or get like the Big Macs or all the McDonald's stuff because it's $1 or $1.10. I don't even know how much it is, but it's cheap, versus getting a pound of ground beef and then making the burger at home, which would
Mhm.
still be much better than buying burgers from these kind of places, right? But mom doesn't have much time because mom has 6 kids to take care of, and so she's a single mom and she's on welfare and she only gets her, food stamps every month so much, and she's trying to make it work, right? And then you have
Mhm.
the school systems that have crappy food, right? Because they have a budget. They prioritize the wrong things. They should have a better budget for better food.
Well, they should have a better budget, but they're unequally funded by the state that, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. You know. So it's like there's a lot of problems in a lot of different places. But then you look at other models of other countries like Europe, and you don't really question the quality of food. Like what you're getting is complete. It's very simple. There's no additives, there's no hidden agendas, right? And the food's no more or less around the same price range. You're just getting less of the manipulated chemicals. How nice would that be?
Well, yes, I think there's something, we could go, and we can go on in this, and I think we'll probably come back to this. But I think as we're considering, um, when I think about, um, and I'm going to specifically speak about my Black experience, right? Not a Black experience, but my Black experience
Mhm.
of generations, right? That came from many parts of the continent of Africa, generations of ancestors that did, and also generations of ancestors that came from Europe, that enslaved and uh, uh, owned, right, my
Mhm.
ancestors, and had children, right, with my ancestors. They are my ancestors. And I think about the ones that have always been farmers. You
Hmm.
know, I have such a deep, long lineage of ancestors who have been farmers. I'm talking about 7 generations back. I'm talking
Hmm.
about 2 generations back. Farming is in my blood. And yet to your point, like I live in the city. I live in the places where roses grow in concrete,
Hmm.
and we have, you know, planter boxes on decks because we don't have grass, but we do have the ability to grow plants and food in our
Hmm.
planter boxes. And I think about what happens for me when I put my hands in the soil
Hmm.
and how
Yeah.
I have the opportunity to remember. And that's a meditative practice for me
Yeah.
to
Oh,
remember.
yeah. Yeah.
And so I have a prayer, right? That I pray for all people who are systemically disconnected um, from this relationship with Earth, from this relationship with the sovereignty that allows us to grow
Hmm.
our own food, right? Um, And I feel
Yes.
like that's a big invitation for the collective right now as we're thinking about like the big systemic shifts that are possible in the fall of empire, because that's happening,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Um, and I see that coming back to, you know, our conversation about the earth remembering, being
Hmm.
called into alignment
Hmm.
with the soil. So I wanted to just offer that, and I'm wondering if there's anything you wanted to share to close.
Yeah, it reminds me of the story about the rishis. They said that they're traveling and they came upon a town and they decided to stay in the town. You know, it was like a little city town. And after spending some time there, they started developing health issues like overweight and diabetes and things like that. And then they left the town, and then the diseases were left behind in the city. And so in Ayurveda, we have a term for, the diseases that manifested as a result of the formations of cities called Gramya dosha. So Gramya is like village or city or town, and dosha is like just that is which is prone to decay. And so putting people in a small space, piled up, no space anywhere, and everyone's just like trying to, survive, but these are also breeding grounds for bigger diseases versus living in alignment with nature in a harmonious state in a community that there's proper space and everyone's connecting in a different way. So that's like Ramya dosha is the result of people living in cities that are just like, because also in cities, what do you have? You have hospitals, you have lots of clinics and urgent clinics, but they've built more and more clinics and hospitals in cities
There are so many
because there are
urgent
more and
cares.
more
There's
people
urgent
getting more
care on
sick.
every block. Yes.
And this wasn't as much so. Was illness always present? Of course it was, because this is part of the nature of life is to be ill. And in Ayurveda, we understand illness comes from internal causes, external causes, doshas, and just exposure to things externally. Like, of course, this is just part of the life journey. But when you put more people in a smaller space, and then you're not giving them the good quality of life in that space, what can you expect? So it's like it's great that we have in Philly and other cities have community gardens, try to connect with each other and cultivate. Like these are nice. These are nice. That's more like the old way of thinking that was more sustainable versus going to the Acme. And when I first started studying holistic medicine in shiatsu school, my teacher was macrobiotics, and she had 2 daughters that she raised them macrobiotically until they're 14. They never ate school food. They never even knew what it was like to eat outside in Wendy's. And she was a single mom in the middle of New York City. My teacher, Marianne Poinmeyer, I love her. And I met her daughters. They were twins, and I was just like, "Oh my God, you guys were macrobiotic for 14 years." And they were very healthy. You can see the energy in their eyes,
Wow.
right? And I'm like, if she can do it in the middle of New York City as a single mom with 2 daughters and still running the school and, like she was extraordinary. And then, at age 14 and a half, when they started hanging out with friends, they're like, Mom, we want to try Wendy's. So, she was like, oh, you know, but they already had 14 years of foundation that their physiology is great. And so in this class, she told us, she said, you can tell the quality of food based on how much an institution produces trash outside.
Ooh. Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
like I throw out trash, just by myself, and when I have friends come and I cook, it's still once every 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a
Okay.
lot of bags of trash, and it's organic bags, of course, you know. And so that stuck with me for over 20 years. Like how much trash is being put out? Because the more trash you have from the foods that you buy, the more trashy that food is. So if you get all these foods
Mm.
and containers and cartons and cans and all these things, no, it's not correct. You should have less trash. And some of the trash that I have is compostable. So I have a compost also. And then I put every year that compost into my soil where my raised beds are. So it's like, and I like that because I have less of an imprint. Do I get Amazon stuff? Of course. And that makes me sad, but there's you have to sometimes pick your poison. I'd rather make
Mm-hmm.
sure the food coming into my body is proper. If I have to buy the organic cotton sheets for my patient's treatments because I'm not going to get the microfiber crap on my table on my patients will not get exposed to those chemicals as much as possible. And that's like a direct place. Like I don't fool around. Cotton
Mm-hmm.
towels, cotton sheets,
Mm-hmm.
wool blanket. So I have to get that extra box from Amazon, but the bigger picture is making sure that person's health is better so they're not getting exposed to plastic,
Mm-hmm.
not getting exposed to chemicals from those plastics that infiltrate the skin, you know. So these are all things to think about, right? And I know we should,
Yes.
but all things to think about.
Well,
But if
this
anybody
is,
wants
yeah.
to, follow up with the, idea of what a pandemic is formed, how it's formed, and like the five different elements of contamination, on my website under health tidbits, it was, I think, the end of 2022, beginning of 2023. It's like a series of 5 articles that people can read about how to like support proper air quality in their house, water quality in their house, soil quality, how to minimize the electromagnetic currents that are in the atmosphere from the Wi-Fi to the phone to like all these things. That's like something as simple as when I'm listening to my phone, I don't have ear pods. I have a headset that connects to the phone. I'm not sending that Bluetooth frequency from my brain to that. Yeah. It's like when I go to the airport, I usually opt out of going through the machines and have them pat me down.
Bond.
So I can avoid that millimeter wave machine, even though they're like, oh, it's not really in effect. I'm like, I know better. Right? So these are all
Mm-hmm.
things that I've written about in those articles. And they have lots of resources and references and like, things to to buy to start changing some of these things and reducing how much you can. Because
Well, Doc,
history will follow us.
history will follow us, as I think we have been discussing throughout this entire chat, and I think especially as we consider how the body remembers,
Mhm,
the earth remembers, and we have also the opportunity to create new memory.
mhm,
And that I think is this really amazing invitation now, to learn from history, and to be in right relationship with our bodies and the earth,
mhm,
um, which is a divine relationship.
mhm,
It is a relationship of, feels like natural order.
mhm,
And so I really appreciate all of our chats, as you know, talking with Dr. Antonio Aragona, who is a doctor of Ayurvedic medicine, so brilliantly knowledgeable, and deeply skilled, I can attest to. Um, and I love our conversations as always. We will be back
We're
next month.
back.
We are, oh, and also, please find Dr. A at Still Point Ayurveda. And Dr. A,
Yep.
Do you want to share at
Yep.
stillpointayurveda.com?
Yep. Stillpointayurveda.com. Yep. And there's lots of great pieces of information from health tidbits to recipes to what I offer. And, you know, this is a lot. It's a very living website.
I love it. I love it. I love getting recipes, especially. And I hope that you all will definitely check out Dr. A. I can't recommend him enough. So I want to thank you for our chat today
Thank
and
you.
the Earth remembers, coming out of this Earth Day, this Earth Month is always Earth Month. So that's why I didn't even put emphasis on it, but I like to be able to connect with this moment in time. So I'm going to close out our recording.